Long before the world learned to name itself, before maps divided land and sky into ownership, Earth existed as a living organism governed by hunger, fear, and survival. 2.9 million years ago, the African landscape was neither gentle nor forgiving. The air carried heat heavy enough to bend breath, and the land itself pulsed with danger. Grasslands stretched toward distant horizons, interrupted by rivers that cut like veins through the soil, feeding forests dense enough to hide death in silence. This was not a world built for comfort, it was a proving ground. And in this ancient arena, Homo habilis, among the earliest toolmakers of the human lineage, walked cautiously through a land already claimed by giants. Homo habilis were small, lightly built, and vulnerable. Standing little taller than a modern child, they lacked speed, claws, or fangs. What they possessed instead was awareness. Their eyes scanned constantly, reading the landscape not for beauty but for warning. Every rustle in the grass carried meaning. Every shadow could hide a predator older and stronger than any primate had the right to challenge. Survival did not come from dominance, but from knowing when to move, when to hide, and when to stand together. Stone tools, simple flakes chipped from river cobbles, were their greatest advantage, not as weapons of conquest, but as tools of last resistance. The rivers of this era were magnets of life and death. Water meant survival, but it also meant vulnerability. Animals gathered at the banks, and predators learned the rhythms of thirst. Beneath the slow-moving surface of these ancient rivers lived a nightmare older than myth. Giant python ancestors, far larger than any living today, thrived in this environment. Some stretched over 20 feet long, with bodies thick as tree trunks and muscles built to crush bone. They did not chase, they waited. Their scales blended with mud and shadow, their bodies still for hours, their senses tuned to vibration and heat. To them, Homo habilis were not thinkers or toolmakers, they were warm, slow prey. The python did not announce itself. There was no warning sound, no dramatic movement. One moment, the riverbank was calm, birds calling softly from the trees, insects humming in the heat. The next, the ground erupted. A coiled mass of muscle surged forward with terrifying speed, wrapping around a single individual before the group could react. The power of the constriction was absolute. Air was forced from lungs in an instant, bones bent under pressure no primate could resist. Panic exploded through the group, their calls sharp and frantic, echoing through the trees. This was not a hunt, it was an execution carried out by instinct perfected over millions of years. For Homo habilis, encounters like this were not rare accidents, they were constant threats woven into daily existence. Giant python ancestors were ambush predators that favored the same resources early humans depended on: water, shade, and prey-rich environments. The overlap was inevitable. Fossil evidence from later periods suggests large constrictors regularly preyed on primates, and there is no reason to believe early humans were exempt. In fact, their upright posture and predictable movement patterns may have made them easier targets. Intelligence had not yet outrun instinct. Yet something changed in moments like these. As one member of the group was crushed within the python's coils, the others did not scatter. Fear burned hot in their chests, but it did not paralyze them. Stones were grabbed instinctively. Sharp-edged flakes, once used to cut meat or scrape hides, became instruments of desperation. Hands trembled, but arms swung. Rocks struck scales with dull thuds again and again, not to kill the snake, but to force it to release. Pain was one of the few things a python could not ignore. The struggle was brutal and chaotic. The snake tightened reflexively, its muscles responding to threat by constricting harder. Dust rose from the ground, leaves shook violently. One wrong movement could bring another human within reach of the coils. But persistence mattered. Blows landed near the head, the most vulnerable part of the body. A lucky strike connected with the jaw. the python recoiled slightly, not retreating but reassessing. In that brief moment of hesitation, the coils loosened just enough for the crushed body to fall limp into the dirt. Whether that individual lived or died was uncertain. Survival in this world was often measured in seconds. The python eventually withdrew, sliding back toward the water, its body disappearing into reeds and mud as silently as it had arrived. It was not defeated, it was merely inconvenienced. The river returned to stillness, but nothing was the same. One life was lost or broken. The group stilled in silence, breathing hard, eyes locked on the water long after the danger vanished. There was no mourning ritual, no language to explain what had happened, but something deeper occurred. Memory formed, pattern recognition sharpened. The riverbank became marked, not on maps, but in the mind. These encounters shaped human behavior in profound ways. Fear of constrictors may have driven early hominins to favor open landscapes over dense riparian forests. Group living became more essential, not for social comfort, but for survival through numbers and shared vigilance. Tools gained new importance, not as hunting implements, but as defensive extensions of the body. Even posture may have evolved under the pressure of such predators. Standing upright allowed for better scanning of tall grass, earlier detection of movement, and more effective throwing of stones. For the giant python ancestors, Homo habilis were a risky but rewarding prey. A single successful ambush provided enough energy to sustain the snake for weeks, but each encounter carried danger. Injuries from stones, even minor ones, could become fatal infections. Over time, natural selection favored snakes that struck faster, chose smaller or isolated prey, or retreated when resistance was too intense. This was not a simple predator-prey relationship. It was an arms race, written in muscle, nerve, and instinct. Life 2.9 million years ago was not heroic. It was harsh, indifferent, and relentless. There were no victories, only survivals. Homo habilis did not dominate the world, they endured it. Each day lived was a narrow escape from extinction. Each generation passed on not stories, but behaviors shaped by terror and trial. The memory of coiled bodies and crushing force lingered in the nervous system, influencing reactions long after specific encounters were forgotten. The deadliest encounters were not those that ended in death, but those that ended in survival. Because survival meant learning, it meant adapting, it meant becoming slightly different than before. Over thousands of generations, these moments accumulated, pushing the human lineage toward greater cooperation, sharper awareness, and eventually mastery over tools and fire. The shadow of the python stretched far into the future, even as the species itself changed and declined. When we imagine the ancient world, it is easy to romanticize it as wild and free, but freedom did not exist here, only pressure, only consequence. 2.9 million years ago, the Earth tested every living thing without mercy. Homo habilis survived not because they were strongest, but because they remembered, and in remembering, they slowly learned how not to die. This was life before history, before civilization, before humanity knew its own name. And in the silent coils of giant python ancestors, the cost of existence was written clearly: survive, adapt, or disappear.